Okay, so let's jump right into this really interesting research paper. It's all about American higher ed, and it asks a pretty tough question. We all think of college as this big path to opportunity, right? But what if that path isn't the same for everybody? So let's picture it like a race. You've got everyone at the starting line, ready to run towards a better future. But here's the kicker. What if the rules were totally different depending on which lane you're assigned to? Well, the whole argument of this paper is that the system isn't just a little bit off. Nope. It says there's a huge double standard baked right into its DNA. It creates a system that the paper calls, and I'm quoting here, fundamentally distorted. All right, so how does this actually play out in the real world? The paper breaks it down as this kind of tale of two colleges, where regulators treat each one completely differently. Okay, so this is really the heart of that double standard. On one hand, you have public universities and colleges. We tend to see them as, a common good. But on the other hand, you have private colleges, especially the for-profit ones, and they often get slapped with a predatory label. And here's what's so wild. This happens even when both types of schools are funded by the very same federal student aid dollars. According to the paper, that one perception, that one label, it ends up shaping all the rules down the line. So why does this happen? The paper points to this thing called regulatory capture. It sounds complicated, but the idea is pretty simple. It's when the big, established players, think huge public university systems with tons of lobbying power, basically get to help write the rules. And surprise, surprise, those rules often end up protecting them from smaller competition. The paper argues that this basically creates a giant protective moat around the big guys, and that makes it almost impossible for smaller, sometimes more innovative schools to even have a fair shot at competing. Okay, so that's the big picture. But how does it actually work on the ground? Let's dive into some really specific examples of what the paper calls asymmetric regulation, basically rules that aren't the same for everyone. A perfect example of this is something called the 90-10 rule. It's a federal law, and it says for-profit colleges can't get more than 90% of their funding from federal student aid. They have to get that last 10% from other sources, like students paying out of pocket. The whole point is to prove that the school has real market value. The people are willing to pay for it with their own cash. Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. Look at this comparison from the source. A small private school could literally be shut down if it gets too much federal money, but a public community college, it can be 100% funded by taxpayers, between federal and state dollars, and there's no penalty at all. It's just fully funded. See the difference? And the paper really hammers this point home. It says, hey, if you actually applied that same 90-10 test to community colleges and counted all the public money they get, including state funds, a whole lot of them would fail big time. But they don't have to take the test. They're just exempt. So you might be thinking, okay, this is all just about weird funding rules, right? Well, according to this paper, not even close. This imbalance goes way deeper than that. It's not just about money. The paper argues that state licensing boards get in on this too. They can create these huge barriers by requiring an insane number of training hours for certain jobs. This creates what the paper calls a massive time tax on students, making them spend way more time and money than they probably need to. Okay, let's take cosmetology as an example. To get your license in a lot of states, you need to log about 1,500 hours of training. 1,500. Just let that number sink in for a second. Now get this. Compare that to what it takes to become an EMT, an emergency medical technician, a job where you're literally saving lives. In many places, that's less than 150 hours. The paper's point here is that this hour inflation for cosmetologists isn't really about public safety. It's about protecting the schools that make a lot of money off those long, expensive programs. So what happens when a private school gets forced to close because of these rules? The story we're usually told is that the students get rescued, but this paper really pokes holes in that whole narrative. They call it the absorption fallacy. It's this mistaken belief that, hey, when a private college shuts down, all the students just magically get absorbed into the local community college and everything's great. But the research shows, it's a lot messier than that. Just look at the data on what actually happens. Yeah, a lot of those students do end up at a community college. But a huge piece of the pie, we're talking over a third of them, they just quit. They drop out of higher ed completely. The race is over for them. And what about the ones who do make the switch? Is it always a better outcome? Well, this chart is pretty eye-opening. It compares completion rates over 6 years. For community colleges, it's less than 40%, but for certificate programs at these private schools, it's closer to 65%. That really flies in the face of the idea that the public option is automatically the better one. And that leads to this really powerful line from the paper. The whole argument boils down to this: just giving students access by getting them in the door isn't enough. If they don't finish and get that degree or certificate, it's not a public good. It's a public expense. So, with all these problems laid out, what's the fix? The good news is the paper doesn't just point fingers, it actually proposes a whole new way of thinking about how to fix the system. And the big idea is something they call competitive neutrality. It's actually pretty straightforward. It just means we should stop judging schools based on whether they're public or private. Instead, let's judge them all on what actually matters: their results. Are students graduating? Are they getting jobs where they can pay back their loans? Are they better off than they were before? Those are the questions we should be asking. And they lay out a pretty clear 4-step plan to get there. First, make everyone play by the same accountability rules. Second, get rid of those weird funding double standards like the 90-10 rule. Third, fix the licensing system so it's just about safety, not about padding hours. And finally, shake up the accreditation system to allow for new ways of proving a school is actually delivering for its students. When you boil it all down, what the paper is really calling for is a huge shift in how we even talk about all this. It says the conversation shouldn't be public versus private anymore. It should be high value versus low value. And value should be defined by one thing: what's best for the students. And so that leaves us with this big question to think about. What would higher education actually look like if every college, no matter its label, had to compete on a truly level playing field? What would change for you, for students, for the schools themselves, and for all of us as taxpayers? It's definitely something to chew on.